Welcome to the Law Firm Growth Podcast, where we share the latest tips, tactics, and strategies for scaling your practice from the top experts in the world of growing law firms. Are you ready to take your practice to the next level? Let's get started.
This episode is brought to you by Sweet Process. If you're looking to grow your law practice, who's going to be taking care of what you're doing today? There's a reason that the fastest growing law firms that we've interviewed on this podcast all swear by SOPs, and that's because that enables them to focus on new things without stuff falling apart once they leave the room. Sweet Process was designed from the ground up to help teams ranging from solos plus freelancers to enterprise scale law firms create and manage the SOPs that allow your team to execute correctly every single time. And at the end of the day, that allows you, the owner, to work on your business, create new process, or even kick back and relax every once in a while. And for a limited time, listeners of the Law Firm Growth Podcast will be able to upgrade to a 28-day free trial by going to sweetprocess.com/lawfirmgrowth. Again, that's sweetprocess.com/lawfirmgrowth. See what Process can do for your firm by signing up today. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. I'm your host as always, Jan Roos, and I am here with a very exciting episode. So we have Owen McGab, the CEO of Sweet Process, on with us today. So thanks for coming on the show, Owen.
Hey, Jan, thanks for having me on the show.
All right, awesome. So you guys may have noticed that Sweet Process reads have started to come out at the beginning of the show. And the reason why we were really excited about Sweet Process, which you've probably heard from the read that came before this episode, is because we are really, really big about process. But I wanted to kind of bring Owen on to give some context because he has a lot of really interesting background on how he arrived at this stuff. And I think it's very timely because I've been seeing a lot of news kind of in the legal marketing, legal practice management sphere, especially in the small business space around stuff like outsourcing, specifically to the Philippines, Latin America, that kind of thing. And Owen, before you started Sweet Process, you were in kind of a similar realm, weren't you?
Oh, yes. So before I started Sweet Process, I used to run a firm where I used to provide businesses here in the US with back office support. So basically they would get to a point where, they're doing the same thing over and over again, and maybe hiring somebody here in the US might be too expensive for them, but they wanted to get work done abroad at a fraction of the price. But in order to do that, you would have to come in and understand how the work is done so that you can take it over from them and deliver the same results or better than they were doing themselves just by having someone abroad, specifically in the Philippines, doing the work for them. But I'm sure we'll go into more details as we progress with the interview.
Yeah, for sure. And then basically it was kind of this thing too, because a lot of times all right, people think, so I've got this person, I've gone from a solo attorney to I have this super VA. So they're going to be ready to rock on day one and doing a good job as me just without any super friends, which we know both is not usually the case where it happens, right?
Well, if it happens, that's magic.
Yeah, seriously. So and basically that kind of ended up leading to the process of, you guys ended up coming up with Sweet Process. I also think the way that you ended up finding your co-founder was super interesting as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, so I guess it's an opportunity to give a much better backstory. So Sweet Process started in the fourth quarter of 2013, right? And I'll tell you how exactly I met my co-founder, Jervis. But before that, like I was saying, I used to have this firm in the Philippines that was providing people here in the US with staff. And this actually blew up at a point when, I think, was it the 4-hour work week or whatever?
Right.
Tim Ferriss, I think. And so everybody, read that book, would just magically just think, hey, I'll just go to, hire somebody abroad, India, Philippines, or whatever. And they would just jump in and start doing the work. But I saw opportunity there and saying, let's provide the service that would do that, of providing the staff to do the work. But in order for us to take over, I had to come in and help my clients understand, okay, all the tasks that you're doing, there's about 80% of the tasks that you do every day in order to deliver your solutions to your customers. There's about 80% of the tasks that are recurring that you guys do over and over again. So what are those tasks? And most of the time they won't even have this task documented, like in terms of procedures, processes, and policies for how the task is done. So I would come in and work with them to document how the work was. As a matter of fact, literally have recordings, like video recordings of, walk us through how you do the work. Imagine that we were your customer, you're doing this for them, walk us through how the task is done. Then we'll record the videos of it and then take that into and document procedures for step-by-step procedures for how the work is done. And so the problem we had then was that, there were no tools that actually made it easy to do. As a matter of fact, there were some enterprise level tools, but the problem is trying to get, my staff in the Philippines to use those tools was like, really hard, because the tools itself were, to be honest, I thought was probably made more for the management level than for people on the ground. And then the other exit end of this spectrum was, well, trying to cobble together a bunch of different tools that were not specifically built for business process management, right? And then you're trying to use Google Docs here, Excel here, blah, blah, there. And for you have a cobbled nightmare of different tools. And in the back of my mind, I was like, dude, I'm going to have to figure out a way to build this tool.
Right.
Well, while still running that company, that agency, I was invited to a podcast hosted by Andrew Warner. The podcast is called Mixergy. So it's a podcast for startups and entrepreneurs who have, gotten to a certain level in their business, come and talk about how they got to their success and stuff like that. So he has that public-facing podcast where he does, those kind of stories, but he also had one that was not public-facing where you actually have to pay as a member to get access to this. And this is where he brings on guests to talk about a specific topic, and they go into a deep dive of basically teaching the systems behind something specific. And so he invited me on there to talk about how I was helping my clients systematize their operations by documenting procedures, processes, and policies. Like, how exactly, if I had a new client, would I have my team take over the client's work, and how are we documenting stuff, right, for them? And so that's what the whole purpose of the course I was invited to do was about. And lo and behold, my co-founder, Jervis, the CTO and co-founder of Sweet Process, was on that call, listening to it, and reached out to me and said, dude, he has this idea that he's trying to work on, and he wants to get my feedback on stuff. And so I said, okay, being the open guy I am, I said, go ahead, let's have this conversation. And then lo and behold, turns out he's trying to build a tool similar to something I really wanted to build for my agency. And I was like, dude, instead of me sharing insight with you on how to do this, let's just go ahead and build this stuff together. And so that's how Sweet Process started. This was the fourth quarter of 2013. And it took us about probably 90 days or so after that conversation to even start writing any code. Because I told him that, I said, dude, instead of us spending time writing any piece of code on how the software should be, why don't we go out there and get real feedback from potential customers, talk to them, figure out what exactly is this problem that they're having with regards to employees not having all the things they need at their fingertips for, being able to know how work is done. Let's go and understand the root problem so that we can understand the problem and then figure out a way to create the software that is easy to use and solves the problem in the most intuitive ways, instead of just going to build up something and then delivering that thing and find out that nobody actually wants it. Yeah. And so that really helped her, because I think I did I even have some of the recordings of those calls, but like over 50 plus calls of just talking to different people from different industries. And after each of those calls, we'd sit down and synthesize, what exactly was he saying, the problem? Yes, he's saying he wants this feature, but why was he asking for this feature? And at the end of the day, was able to crystallize certain things that, okay, this has to be the bedrock on which we build the software. These are the things that we need to make sure the software needs to be able to have. And then we went ahead, launched the software, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, it's some of the best stories that you ever hear about softwares, programs, services that people develop are coming from scratching your own itch. And it seems like it definitely kind of fits the category on it. But what I also want to pick out that's super interesting is that you came with your own experience from essentially being consulting on these process things from yourself in a lot of different businesses, but you also had a really great test bed to try these out with all the clients that you presumably still had from like the VA stuff, right?
Yeah. And the good thing is that if I had just only depended on my own experience, probably would have gone in a different route. And so I'm glad that I listened to back then when we're starting this, I was listening to a lot of, interviews on how to build software and how to do stuff, because that's essentially what I was trying to do at this point. And I think I don't know who exactly I heard this from, was like, don't worry about building a line of code, just minimum viable product, just try to understand the root issue. And I had my own experience, my own issue with this thing, but if I had focused on that, I would have thought maybe I needed to focus on trying to get customers who were trying to outsource their work. And
Yeah.
that would be what I would have gone into. But by having this situation where I talk to different people from different industries, regardless of whether they were my customer or my client or even had need to outsource, it brought a whole different perspective. And I think at the end of the day, that was much better for us.
Yeah. All right. So kind of zooming in and basically to kind of talk about our own experience too, it's very interesting. So it's like, we've got about 12, 13 people on our team right now here at Case Fuel. And it's been really interesting over the last year because, we were much smaller probably 2 years ago, or probably a team of 3 or 4. But having to scale, which is the goal of a lot of people that are on this podcast right now, it's been a process of trying to get things that I have been doing, other people on the staff have been doing, out and onto some some external source. And how we've kind of been dealing with it probably reflects a lot of the situations that the listeners of this show are probably going into. And like, I can definitely empathize with the situation where you have, some kind of cobbled together situation and you got half your processes are in Google Docs and the other ones are on Google Sheets. Yeah. Like, let's kind of talk about that more. Like, what do you think are kind of some of the common pain points? And I guess this could kind of speak to your clients that back when you're running the outsourcing things, or the situation that you guys are finding when people are reaching out to you to use Suite Process. Like, what kind of situations would you say are the pain points for people that need you guys the most?
So basically, it's two different perspectives. First of all is getting your current employees up to speed and being able to have the information right there when they need it, so that there's no delay of, how do I do this? I did this like 4 months ago. How do I do this again? I mean, we're all human beings and have a lot of things going on. So yes, you might have done it 4 months ago, but now you don't have the information right there in front of you. Spending time trying to dig through emails and all through wherever you might have kept the information, trying to figure out how to do it. And then there's the other perspective of, okay, well, we're growing rapidly, we're trying to hire people, and now maybe it's a thing where, because the way the situation is, you have to hire remotely or whatever, and people can't come into the office or whatever. So how do you make sure that the employee that you're hiring hits the ground running? Gone are the days where they had the whole thing of you being able to come and look at someone's shoulder and say, hey, how do I do this? Now you literally got to make sure that information is information is right at the fingertips. So there's two different issues that bring people into thinking about, okay, maybe there needs to be a central place where information is for both the current employees as well as new employees. Now, depending on where you're attacking the issue from or where you're experiencing the pain from, it all boils down to, where do you start, right? And I keep telling people that, we don't want to make these things complicated. Let's figure out, okay, as a manager or as in this case, you're talking to owners of law firms, I'm assuming, right? So the managing partner of the law firm, what is that one thing that your employees keep asking you questions about over and over again? As a matter of fact, it probably been the 20th time you've explained yourself on how the work is done. And the reason that they're asking you how it's done is not because they just want to ask. Obviously, it's because the information is not clear. So why don't we focus on, investing some time so that we can, so that you in your situation as a managing partner of the law firm can have these instructions step by step of how the work needs to be done, so that at least they don't have to keep coming back to you. There is a starting point that they can refer to, right? And you're no longer being asked the question. Now, the next thing is, well, I'm a busy partner of this law firm. My job is to be helping my clients litigate their cases or whatever your field is. When am I going to have the time to actually now build this document? Great question. So people think that when you start documenting a procedure, it has to be an encyclopedia. No, it doesn't have to be that detailed. Because if you take the mode of thinking of, okay, this has to be constant, continuous improvement, then you know that you can start from ground zero and you just keep on adding more blocks on it and keep improving. So where do you start? Identify that task that people keep asking you over and over again for instructions. Now, the next thing is just document the title of the procedure for that task and the title of each of the steps. And that's it. That's the starting point. I call that a minimum viable procedure. Now, you say, oh, well, it doesn't give as much instructions, right? But then there are people, perhaps a manager or some person in charge of operations, that already have an idea because you talk to them about this. Remember, you keep talking to people about this task over and over again. So obviously, some people already have an idea of how this is, right? So now you've documented in Suite Process that minimum viable procedure, which has a title of procedure and title of each of the steps. Now add that procedure to a team that has the employees, perhaps your manager or someone in operations that you know have to an extent have some idea of how this task is done. And then you start saying, hey, using sweet process, hey, I've documented this outline for this procedure. What should go into each step? So now it goes from a thing where you as the managing partner of the law firm has to do all the work to something where you've already created that outline of the procedure. So it's not a blank screen and everybody's looking at the blank screen, but you've given them something to start with. And then you've encouraged people in the law firm who have an idea of how the task is done to go in there and start putting in the details of each of the steps. Now, when they're putting in the details, how much details goes into it? I say just put enough to get somebody started on that step. That's all. Because as people start using these procedures that you've created with your team to start doing work, whenever they come across something that is not clear, that becomes a trigger that comes back to you or your manager that say, okay, we have this procedure where step number one, something is off. The person is doing the work and step number one is not clear. Now it becomes a trigger for you to go back into step number one and improve on just step number one so that it's up to par to what it needs to be, right? And so, like I said, you give yourself the permission that is a continuous improvement thing. And so you've built that minimum viable procedure. You've collaborated with your employees to put in the minimum details in each step. And then as they start doing the work, now when something comes in that is an issue, it gets fed back to you so that you can improve that step or whatever step that needs to be improved upon. And all this is done easily with a tool like Sweet Process.
Yeah. I mean, that's also really interesting too. Like I see a lot of parallels in the philosophy that you guys use to develop the process and the process or the philosophy that one can use to develop processes within the platform. And like, the reason why a lot of this lean methodology stuff is popular in Silicon Valley is because it allows people to get started faster and it allows people to kind of, I think a big situation too. And what I really like that you said about that, Owen, was like, I feel like a lot of people stop themselves from taking the next step because they're already looking at the final product that is going to be the absolute, they want to go from step 0 to step 10 when they only need to go from step 0 to step 1. And what you just kind of highlighted there is really important thing too. Now, a couple of things I wanted to point out, and I actually think this is one of the most fascinating parts of the platform. And to take a quick step back, like we've been investigated that like ever since we ended up starting working together with Owen, looking at the process ourselves. And basically, Sweet Process is truly built from the ground up. And a lot of the situations that we've used in the past, everything ranging from Google Docs, spreadsheets with a bunch of videos tied to it, like that kind of stuff. Having something that's really purpose built really helps facilitate the process. And one of the things I think is super unique is your guys' concept of ownership on a process and the ability to iterate on the process itself, but also to follow it for a specific instance. The process that somebody's going to use to intake a new client versus the process to intake John Doe when he ends up coming in.
So let me break that down because your listener, I know what you're saying, but your listener might not know what you're saying. So let's use an example of something that maybe most law firms would do. So you document a process for how to onboard a new client, right? But that's actually the documentation of how the work is done. Now, with our app, you can collaborate together to document how the work is done. The also beautiful thing about it is you can also assign real work to people to do based on what you've documented so that people can never say, hey, I don't know how to onboard a client. So let's say client James comes in now, you literally go into the app and assign a task to your employee saying onboard client James, and that task is going to be based on the underlying process that you have documented. So while they're actually doing the real work of onboarding client James and following the instructions, it's right there in front of them. They will never be able to say, I don't know how the work is done. So we married both the documenting of how the work is done with you actually doing real tasks and work. The reason why is because on one end, as people are collaborating together to document how the work is done, there's a lot of insight to be gathered. But also, we also believe that even when the work is being done, there's a lot of insight to be gathered. That's where you find out things that were not documented properly or some issue that was not accounted for. Now, if you do the task management in a different app, you are now depending on your employee being so proactive to leave that other app and remember whatever they were doing and come back to this other app where the documentation is happening and say, hey, there was something wrong that wasn't encountered there. But if both are in the same place, it's just a click of a button and the information goes back to the underlying the manager who created the document and say, hey, something was not accounted for. I'm working on an actual task right here. It was not accounted for. And so that manager can get that information in real time, see that the employee is correct, update the underlying process or procedure, and in real time, that task they're working on is updated with the new steps or the improvement. Voila.
No, and that's fantastic too, because it also kind of, we always kind of talk about processes as an asset, but the ability to have this directly in the software is really a game changer because it allows it to become a living asset, right? It's not just some, dry, dusty old bones that somebody's going to, it's like a big guidebook. You blow the dust off of whenever something comes in. It's like this thing is getting interpreted by real world feedback, which is also, in the kind of process we're talking about, makes it easier to get started because, you can fix it as time goes on, right? But yeah, I thought that was really cool. As far as the quality of the deliverables, which I'm sure a lot of the law firms listening to this are talking about, if there's a lot of people, I don't know, Owen, do you ever read that? I'm sure you read this book, Checklist Manifesto.
Atul Gawande?
Yes, sir. Yeah, but the kind of stuff that's used in emergency rooms and surgeries and stuff, it's like, it allows you to really get to the point when you've invested the time into getting these processes dusted up and really tuned up. It might seem like a lot of work on the front end, but at the end, you have consistency of product, whether it's the best person on your team or the worst person on your team who, didn't sleep last night and maybe partied a little bit too late, right? If you can get it done by everyone, then you really have something to kind of work with. So I wanted to kind of go into a little bit more of this creation process. So when people are considering this, let's ask the question first. So we've gone over what the processes that somebody should kind of talk about from scratch. But, do you guys have any sort of capabilities in place for adapting stuff for like maybe another platform that somebody might have been using, like a project manager?
Great question. Yeah. So obviously we built it primarily with the intention that you would use it both for documenting and actually carrying out tasks. But let's say for some reason you were able to convince your team that, okay, let's use it for documenting, but they're so keen on using a different tool for carrying out the task. Well, you can obviously marry Sweet Process, or the technical word is integrate Sweet Process with another software via API, right? So if you have someone technical on your team, you can do the API of our software integrated with the API of the other software. Or if you're not so technical, you can use a third-party tool called Zapier or Zapier. Basically, Zapier is a software that basically all they do is marry different software together. And so as long as the other software is on their platform, then you'll be able to marry both software together and achieve what you want to do. I give an example. So let's say you use Salesforce, for instance, for your CRM, right, for sales, for getting new law firm clients. And let's say someone fills out a form on your website, and then when they fill out a form on your website, that triggers something submitted to your, a new lead submitted to your Salesforce, right? And now, so Salesforce is a CRM that you're using, right? It's customer relationship management software. And now, when that happens, let's say you've designed an actual sales process inside of Sweet Process of what your person who in your company who handles sales, what they need to do so that sales follows a predictable process, right, of step-by-step what they need to do. So once the form is filled out on the website, it triggers a new lead in Salesforce. If you have an integration with Sweet Process where you've integrated Salesforce with Sweet Process, that can now lead to a task in Sweet Process that your employee is following a task to carry out the sales process to close that new lead. And as the person is carrying out those steps in Sweet Process, checking all the steps in the task that was generated, that information is also passed back into Salesforce. So I'm just giving an example of where you want to use a different software to carry out something, but you didn't want to use Sweet Process to do it. If you're technical, you can do the API to API integration, or if you can use a third-party tool like Zapier, that works too.
Okay, that's super cool. And then, it's also interesting to keep in mind too, because like this whole kind of concept. And one of the things I noticed that you said really earlier, and I've got some ideas for the reasoning behind this, but one of the things you noticed when you were going out to find the solutions in the market, a lot of these were enterprise, which weren't working, but a lot of them were designed for managers and not employees. So I know that the concept of roles within the process is super important, but can you talk about a little bit, just kind of in the general case, like who do you think within an organization should be responsible for writing process? Is it a management thing? Do you think it should be coming from the top down, the ground up, somewhere in between? Like, how do you see people using this within the platform?
I'm sure my answer will surprise you. We believe everybody should be able to write documentation. on anything. You see a change, make a change. Street process is built so that we empower everybody. Now, there's a caveat to it where we want managers of a department. Let's say we have a department. Let's say I'm struggling for a good law
Maybe
firm.
collections, billing, something.
Yeah, collections, right? So let's say we have a manager in the collections department. So in Sweet Process, you can create teams that represent your actual company. And so you'll also have a team in Sweet Process called collections. And within that team, you can designate somebody as a manager. And what it means as a manager in Sweet Process is that person can approve all changes to all the documents that are created in Sweet Process. But at the same time, everybody who's not a manager, as long as they have access to that document because they're part of that team, they can see a change and make a change. So if they see a change that needs to be made because while they were working on the task, some brilliant insights inspired them, they can go into that underlying document and edit and make the changes. And if they do, because they're not the manager in Sweet Process, they will have to seek approval from the manager. So why we do it this way is because we don't want any kind of bottleneck of people now relying on somebody to do something. No, you see the change, go make a change, and then knowing that there's that caveat that the manager has the ability to look through the changes that were suggested, and if they like it, they can go ahead and approve it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's really important too, because like if you think about the situation, like obviously people have a range of where they're at in growing their law practice when they're listening to this. We've got people that are solos that are listening to this show and maybe are just about to hire their first VA. And we have people that are managing attorneys that are maybe 2 or 3 levels between the people at the front line. But I think it's really important that like a lot of the times too, like I have situations, there's processes that run in case that I haven't touched in 6 months because it's 2 levels below me, right? But those people are the ones who are closer to what's happening every single day. And if they have to tick off like 3 things that didn't matter every single time they do it, then they have the ability to suggest changes, which I think is brilliant.
Obviously, we want everybody to be proactive so that they can go in there, see a change and make a change. But we also have the ability to say, if they do not want to be that proactive, but they want to be able to pass feedback, they can go into that underlying document and leave comments and mention the specific manager, say, hey, I think I need step, do this, whatever. And the manager can go and look at all the comments and all the feedback and then go make the changes. So we make it as flexible for those proactive employees that want to go in there and literally make the changes and seek approval, or for those who want to, be passive and share the information via feedback, and then it's up to the manager to make the change. We make that happen as well.
Gotcha. Now, I have a question that's outside of the scope of the software itself, but I think that you might have a good answer for it because you've seen so many of these deployments. How do you crack the challenge of employees or managers or somebody in the organization that is really, really stuck in their ways and they want to be a stick in the mud? How are you getting, or how do you recommend people get compliance for the important people that need to be using a software like this within the organization?
So who is stuck in the mud? Is it the manager or is the underlying lower level employee? I just want to get context.
I guess it could be anyone. Yeah. I mean, like, how would you do it for either?
So it depends. I mean, if you're the manager of the...
Stop paying them.
That's why I try to get context. So if you're the managing partner, you have some lower level employee who is, stuck in the mud. Well, at this point, you might have to find an employee who's willing to, do things according to the progression that you want things to happen. So you have to let go of that person. But now, let's imagine this is a different scenario where it's actually maybe not the managing partner who's stuck in the mud, but like some high-level partner in a company who's stuck in the mud. And this is some person who's the operations person trying to make some changes, but this person who's stuck in the old ways is above him. I would say the best thing to do is, keep letting them do their old way, but then use a tool like Sweet Process and craft a new way of doing the same exact thing, and then make a case of their way versus a new way. At the end of the day, results is what matters. If you can get better results crafting a new way for doing things using Sweet Process than the other person uses their old way, and you can show the results of this old way versus using Sweet Process the new way, well, I mean, results speak for themselves. And then you can take the results that they got using their way and your results using the new way and take that a level above them and say, hey, managing partner, this is what we've found so far. I'm not saying that you should fire anybody, but I'm saying that, as it comes to a certain point where we have to make a decision that's in the best light for the company. And based on what we are saying, this is a much more effective way to do things. The results are way much better. If we keep doing things the old way, then that says a lot more about us. So what are we going to say about us? When you say things like that, and you put things like that from a results standpoint, then, at this point, the managing partner will do what's right.
Yeah, I was going to say too, because I mean, I'm obviously a convert to the Church of Process, but like basically there are some people that kind of could take some time to go around, but like, I know we mentioned the checklist manifesto earlier, but as far as like, I guess the philosophy and the strategy behind using this in business as a whole, like, who are your favorite resources? Could be authors, could be podcasts, could be, I don't know, management gurus. Like, who do you really look to yourself on as far as like the biggest thinkers in this field?
So in the process improvement field, or just generally in business?
Yeah, I'd say operations for the most part. Yeah, process stuff for the most part.
Okay, so it's hard for me to answer that question right now because most of the books on operations I've kind of read them because I had to at a certain point. So you have the E-Myth, Michael Gerber, Build to Sell, John Warrillow. I'm just talking about the most popular ones. And now you have The Goal by what's his name?
Oh gosh, I know that guy. He's got he's an Italian guy, Lemony Snicket, or I don't know, it's not Lemony.
Yeah, but The Goal is actually very good. It's all about figuring out constraints in a process, and how constraints happen to affect the output and stuff like that. I mean, I might be wrong in my summary of the book, but it's a great book. The Goal, I think that's called. And then there's another one called Work the System by Sam Carpenter. Yeah,
Right.
so Work the System is good. So there are a lot of books around the whole thing of management and stuff. And the way I learn these days is really, if there's something specific in my business that I am trying to catch up on, when it comes to learning, I learn mostly from audio, basically audio books. That's my favorite way to learn. So when it comes to books, I like to look for autobiographies of people who entrepreneurs and stuff, so I can learn from them. But when I'm trying to learn something specific, I look for a podcast that is dedicated to that specific thing, and I can get the most real up-to-date information on that very thing I'm trying to learn. Because by the time you start looking at a book for that specific topic, odds are is that the strategy and tips and whatever are kind of old. So the most up-to-date things I would find are actually podcasts, especially listening to the most up-to-date recent episodes on that very topic. So find a podcast that is dedicated to a specific topic that you're trying to solve. That's the best way I find myself for learning. And for from learning from other entrepreneurs, I look for biographies that I can learn from the stories behind how they build the business, stuff like that.
No, that's kind of really interesting too. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but our book, which I think I wrote that in 2017. Marketing world's changed a little bit since then, so I totally agree.
Yeah.
If you want the hot stuff, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. But I'll also say this too. Like I kind of had two reasons to do this because I'm very interested in your list of books. So I think about it, and I'm going to add some to mine. We'll have those in the show notes too as well. But potentially for the middle manager who's looking to sell the higher level manager, a lot of times I found that people are more receptive to third-party recommendations. So if it's coming from Sam Carpenter or John Warrillow instead of from you, a lot of the times too, a book as a gift can go a long way for people that are trying to convince somebody who's a little stuck in their ways. So thanks for that.
The book as a gift depends on the person being willing to read the book, right?
That's true.
That's why I said if you want the real results today, go ahead and build the process that you think that is better. Let them do theirs, challenge them to, let's see who's going to get a better result. You do your way, I do my new way. Let's see, turn it into a fun thing, let's see who's going to get a better results. And at the end of it, we'll decide based on that. And that's it.
Yeah. So, okay, this has been fantastic. And then just kind of like to sum these things up, I know I mentioned this at the beginning, but like when people are growing their businesses, like sometimes when you have process that's not working, it can kind of feel like that old circus act where like people are, you got the guy who's spinning the plates on top of the thing, and then the one starts wobbling and you got to run over to that one and correct it. And like, if you don't have a stable process, that's what it ends up looking like. But the real goal for this, and this is how we've been using it on our business and how honestly the most successful people we've had on this podcast all talk about process. But this is the way that you're going to end up moving forward. There's no way, if you imagine what your law firm is going to look like at 5 times the revenue, more things will be happening. You cannot do them all, but your organization can. So it's been super helpful to hear what you had to say about that, Owen. I really appreciate it.
And the truth that most people don't realize is that most times, if you have a problem in a business, it's actually a process problem, not necessarily a person problem. So if you come to that from that approach, like most of the problem I have are process problems, then it's easy to, I mean, you're still going to do the work of, figuring out the process, improving it or whatever. So that is work, but it's easier to solve problems when if you focus on process, identifying the issue and solving it from a process standpoint.
Well, yeah. And also to that point too, like, you bring up something interesting, which is like, based on your background, especially, it's like, if you have process that's written out to the point where somebody who doesn't speak English as their first language from the Philippines is able to do it to the same level as a US employee that's in the office with you, that's a really strong process. And like, sometimes people are too quick to blame, the person who's on, the person who's following the process. And so the process that they themselves wrote. So it's, there's a lot of ways to look at that.
It should be such that anybody you literally pick up the street can follow it and get the same results. I mean, obviously, if they have specific experience, it then takes it to the next level. One thing I didn't even mention, because a lot of times people think that just having, documentation of how work is done makes this whole thing become monotonous and people are not, thinking anymore and it might be dry. But I wager to say that having documentation for how the different tasks that you do in your company has done, having documentation actually allows you to be more creative. Because instead of spending time trying to think of how the work is done, it's literally right there in front of you and you're working on it. Now you can start identifying some places, maybe I don't need to do this step anymore. Maybe I can automate this. Maybe I can outsource this. Maybe I can even eliminate this task altogether. And just by thinking like that, I think that is creativity.
Yeah, 100%. There's a creativity in the process, but also like if you have something that used to take you, if it took you all day to run payroll once a month, think about if you could have that handed off to somebody else or you can do it more efficiently yourself, then that allows you to focus on higher level things in the business. And that's not just for you, it's, for your people as well. If they have something that's, like you get to the point where it's like driving your car home from work back when people used to do that kind of thing. But like, a lot of the times you can drive 35 miles and not even realize, not even pay attention to it. But that's where your processes could be like in your company. And then where would your mind go then? So it's a really exciting thing to kind of think about.
Yeah. And if you've taken the time to document how work is done and you literally know that, people follow this, it gets the results you want. And people are following it and not getting the results they want. It's just down to two things. Either you need to make improvements to the underlying process, or maybe the document is being improved to the point where it actually works. And that's just an easy way to identify somebody who shouldn't be in the company anymore.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's, it kind of comes down to due diligence. But like one of the things I really like about like this whole kind of philosophy, Owen, is that it really is a philosophy of ownership, right? Mm-hmm. And I think people like the more stuff that you can kind of take, well, look, this is probably the thing too. It's like, if you want to own a large law firm, it's probably, best to start with owning what's in front of you today, right? So the more you can kind of take responsibility for the better it can be. But this has been a great podcast, Owen. And then for next steps, we got a pretty special offer for the guests. And again, this is one that you might have heard once or twice, given because of a sponsorship. But what's the best way for people to take the next step?
So we have something where we have with Jan, where if you go to our website by default, you will get a 14-day trial. But we don't want you to do that because we actually want you to get an extended 28-day trial just by going to sweetprocess.com/law firm growth. Again, that's sweetprocess.com/law firm growth. And Jan will link to it. So basically, it will basically let us know that, you came from Jan, listen to this podcast, but more importantly, you get an extended trial to try out Sweet Process. And we look forward to having you. Come join us.
Yeah. And I totally recommend it too, guys. We're on the platform. And I also have to say, there's also, Owen has fantastic onboarding sequence as well, if you're into that kind of thing. So basically, sign up and jump in on it. I got to say, if you haven't looked at something like this, this is absolutely critical to getting to the next level. As much as stuff like marketing, as much as stuff like hiring, the process is really, there's a reason why the people who are running 7-figure firms that we interview here all mention it. And that's because it's important. So again, Owen, thank you so much for taking the time. And for everyone else, I'll see you guys next week, Tuesday at 8 a.m. on the Law Firm Growth Podcast.
Yeah, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. For show notes, free resources, and more, head on over to casefuel.com/podcast. Looking forward to catching up on the next episode.